My brother demanded I give him my inheritance because he was the only man in the family. My brother Vince was 3 years older than me and had been telling me I was less than him since we were children. He said boys were smarter than girls. He said boys were stronger than girls. He said boys would always be more important than girls and I should just accept my place in the world. Our parents never corrected him. Our father thought it was funny. Our mother said Vince was just being a boy and I should not take it personally. I took it personally every single time. Growing up, Vince got everything he wanted. He got the bigger bedroom. He got the newer bicycle. He got the car when he turned 16 while I had to wait until I could buy my own at 19. Our parents said Vince needed these things because he was going to be the head of his own household someday. They said I would just marry someone who would provide for me so I did not need as much. I learned early that arguing was pointless. I just worked harder. I got a job at 15 and saved every penny. I got scholarships to pay for college because our parents said they could only afford to help one child, and Vince needed it more. I graduated with honors and got a good job in accounting while Vince dropped out after 2 years and bounced between dead-end positions. None of that mattered to our parents. Vince was still the golden child because Vince was the son. Our grandmother was different. Grandma Faye was our mother's mother, and she had opinions about how her daughter raised us. She told our mother that favoring Vince would ruin him. She told our mother that I deserved the same opportunities as my brother. She told our mother that the world was changing and women did not need men to take care of them anymore. Our mother ignored her. Grandma Faye did not ignore me. She called me every Sunday to ask about my life. She came to my college graduation even though our parents said it was too far to drive. She visited my first apartment and told me she was proud of the woman I had become. She said I reminded her of herself when she was young. She said she wished she had someone in her corner back then, the way she wanted to be in mine. When Grandma Faye got sick 2 years ago, I drove 4 hours every weekend to help take care of her. I cooked her meals and cleaned her house and sat with her while she watched her favorite old movies. Vince visited twice in 18 months. Both times he asked Grandma Faye for money. Both times she told him no. She said he needed to learn to stand on his own feet. She said she would not enable his laziness. Grandma Faye passed away on a Wednesday morning in April. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. Vince showed up late and spent most of the service on his phone. A week later, the lawyer called us for the reading of the will. We all sat in the lawyer's office waiting to hear what Grandma left behind. The lawyer read through the standard parts first. Grandma left some jewelry to our mother. She left some furniture to a cousin who had always admired it. She left a donation to the animal shelter where she used to volunteer. Then the lawyer got to the main assets. Grandma's house was worth about $300,000. Her savings account had another $200,000. She also had a small investment portfolio worth around $150,000. All of it went to me. Every single penny. The house, the savings, the investments, everything Grandma Faye owned was now mine. Vince stared at the lawyer like he misheard. He asked the lawyer to repeat it. The lawyer repeated it. He asked if there was a mistake. The lawyer said there was no mistake. He asked why he was not included. The lawyer said Grandma Faye left specific instructions. She said Vince would receive exactly what he earned through his relationship with her. She said that the amount was 0. Vince exploded. He shot forward across Nathan Powell's desk, both hands slamming down on the polished wood surface hard enough to make the pen holder rattle. I need to see that document myself. Nathan slid the will across the desk without changing his expression, his movements calm and measured like he dealt with angry people every day. Vince grabbed the papers and started reading, his finger tracing each line while his mouth moved silently. My mother made a choking sound beside me, and then the crying started. Quiet at first, but getting louder with each breath. My father's face went from normal to pink to deep red in the span of maybe 10 seconds, the color spreading up from his collar to his forehead. I could not move. My hands gripped the arms of my chair, and I just sat there watching my family fall apart over words on paper that Grandma Faye had written months ago. Vince finished reading and started over from the beginning. His hands shook enough that the papers rustled. My mother kept crying and my father kept getting redder, and Nathan just sat there behind his desk with his hands folded, waiting. The office felt too small suddenly, like the walls were closer than they had been 5 minutes ago. The air conditioning hummed, but I felt hot anyway. Vince read the will a third time before he looked up at me. You manipulated her. His voice came out rough and accusing. You spent all that time with her and you poisoned her mind against me. My father jumped in before I could respond. There is no way Mom would do this unless someone convinced her to. You must have told her lies about Vince. You must have made her think he did not care about her. Nathan cleared his throat and both of them turned to look at him. Mrs. Faye was mentally sound and fully capable of making her own decisions. I met with her multiple times over the past year to discuss her estate planning. She was very clear about her wishes and her reasoning. Vince slammed the papers down on the desk. What reasoning? What possible reason could she have? Nathan picked up the will and found a specific page. She stated that you would receive exactly what you earned through your relationship with her. She documented every interaction she had with you for the past 3 years, including the 2 times you visited and asked for money. My father opened his mouth and closed it again. My mother's crying got quieter but did not stop. She begged me from her chair, reaching across to grab my arm. You have to do the right thing here. We are family, and family takes care of each other. You cannot just keep everything when Vince needs help too. The words hit me wrong because I remembered being 7 years old and asking why Vince got a new bike when mine was broken and being told that boys needed things more than girls did. I remembered being 16 and asking why Vince got a car and being told I would marry someone who would buy me one. I remembered being 19 and asking for help with college and being told they could only afford to help one child, and Vince needed it more. Family takes care of each other. I stood up from my chair and picked up my purse. I need time to process this. My mother started to say something else, but I was already walking toward the door. Vince shouted after me that I was a selfish bitch who stole his birthright. I kept walking. Nathan called my name, but I did not stop until I was in the hallway with the door closed behind me. The drive back to my apartment took 4 hours, and I do not remember most of it. My phone started buzzing before I even got out of the parking lot. I glanced at it at a red light and saw my mother's name, then my father's name, then my mother again. I put the phone in the cup holder and turned the radio up loud enough to drown out the buzzing. The highway stretched out in front of me and I just drove, my hands tight on the steering wheel and my mind blank. When I finally pulled into my parking spot at my apartment building, I checked my phone. 23 missed calls. 15 from my mother, 6 from my father, 2 from Vince. I had 1 voicemail. I sat in my car in the dark parking lot and played it. Vince's voice came through angry but trying to sound reasonable. We need to talk about fixing this situation before it tears the family apart. I want to work this out like adults. Call me back. I deleted the voicemail and got out of the car. He was blaming me for family problems like I was the one who spent 30 years telling him he was better than me because he was born male. Inside my apartment, I dropped my purse on the counter and stood in the kitchen with my hands shaking. The anger hit me all at once, hot and overwhelming. I grabbed my phone and called Natalia. She answered on the second ring and I asked if she could come over. She showed up 40 minutes later with 2 bottles of wine and did not ask any questions until we were sitting on my couch with full glasses. I told her everything from the beginning. Grandma Faye's death, the will reading, the inheritance, Vince's explosion, my parents' reactions, the drive home, the 23 missed calls. Natalia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she took a long drink of wine. Then she asked me one question. What would your grandmother want you to do with this gift she gave you? I opened my mouth to answer and then closed it again. Grandma Faye had not just left me money. She had left me proof that I mattered. She had left me validation that I was worthy and loved. She had left me a message that said I deserved good things regardless of what my parents thought. I called Nathan Powell first thing the next morning from my kitchen table with coffee getting cold in front of me. He picked up on the third ring and I asked him about next steps for managing the inheritance. I also asked if Vince could legally challenge the will. Nathan explained that anyone could file a challenge, but Grandma Faye's will was ironclad. She had documentation of her mental capacity from her doctor. She had written statements explaining her reasoning. She had met with him multiple times over a year to make sure everything was clear and legal. The challenge would fail, but it might take time and cause stress. He recommended I talk to a financial advisor soon to understand the tax implications and investment options. He gave me a name and number for someone he trusted. I wrote it down on a napkin because I could not find paper. My mother called while I was getting ready for work. I almost did not answer, but I knew she would just keep calling. Her voice came through the phone thick with tears. You are destroying this family. You are breaking my heart by being greedy when your brother needs help. I held the phone away from my ear for a second and took a breath. Then I asked her what Vince needed help with. She said he was $30,000 in credit card debt and had been counting on inheritance money to get back on his feet. I felt something twist in my chest that might have been sympathy, except I remembered Grandma Faye refusing to give Vince money twice. She had said enabling his irresponsibility was not helping him. She had said he needed to learn to stand on his own feet. My mother kept talking about family and responsibility and doing the right thing, but I was not really listening anymore. My father called that evening with a different approach. His voice had that stern quality he used when he wanted me to know he was serious. He said that as the man of the family, Vince had responsibilities and expenses I did not understand as a single woman. He said the house should go to Vince because he would need it when he got married and started a family. He said I would just marry someone who would provide for me anyway, so I did not need it. I sat on my couch listening to him explain why my brother deserved my inheritance, and something clicked into place in my head. My father still thought this way after I had been financially independent for years. He still thought this way after Vince dropped out of college and bounced between jobs. He still thought this way after I graduated with honors and built a career. He would never see me as equal to Vince. Not ever. Charlotte Broderick's office was downtown in a building with marble floors and too much glass. She met me in the lobby and shook my hand with a firm grip. Her office had windows overlooking the city, and she offered me coffee before we sat down. She walked me through exactly what I had inherited. The house needed some repairs to the roof and the plumbing, but nothing major. The investments were solid, mostly index funds and bonds that Grandma had been adding to for decades. They needed some rebalancing to be more appropriate for someone my age. The tax implications were significant, but manageable with proper planning. Charlotte spread papers across her desk and explained everything in language I could understand. She treated me like a capable adult making important financial decisions. She did not talk down to me or suggest I wait for a man to help me figure it out. After a lifetime of my parents treating me like I could not handle money, sitting in Charlotte's office felt revolutionary. Vince showed up at my apartment on Saturday morning without calling first. I was still in my pajamas drinking coffee when someone knocked on my door hard enough to make me jump. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing in the hallway. He had driven 4 hours to talk to me. His face looked calm, almost pleasant, which meant he had switched tactics. I opened the door but left it wide open, unwilling to be alone with him given how he exploded at Nathan's office. He smiled at me and asked if he could come in. I stepped back and gestured to the couch, but I did not close the door. Vince sat down on my couch and ran his hands through his hair. He looked tired and older than his 30 years. He started talking about the lawyer's office and how he lost control. He said he was sorry for yelling and making a scene. He said he was shocked because he always thought Grandma loved both of us the same amount. His voice stayed calm and reasonable, like he practiced what to say on the drive over. He said he understood why I was upset, but we needed to think about this situation like adults. He said families should stick together and not let money come between them. He suggested we sell the house and split everything 50-50, because that was what fair siblings would do. He said Grandma probably did not think about how her will would cause problems between us. He said we could fix this ourselves without lawyers or court battles. I sat in the chair across from him and felt something cold settle in my chest. I asked him if he thought fair parents would have treated us equally growing up. His face went blank for a second. He said that was different. I asked him how it was different. He shifted on the couch and said our parents did the best they could with what they had. He said they had to make choices about where to put their resources. I reminded him that those resources went to him while I worked at 15 to buy my own things. He waved his hand like I was bringing up old history that did not matter anymore. He said we were talking about now, not the past. He said I needed to stop holding grudges and be mature about this situation. I felt my jaw tighten. I told him I was not making any decisions about the inheritance right now. I said I needed time to process everything and figure out what I wanted to do. His calm mask started to crack. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He said I was being difficult on purpose. He said I got scholarships for college, so I did not need help back then. He said he struggled and deserved support from the family. I stared at him and felt something like amazement at how he could twist reality. He struggled through 2 years of college he barely attended while partying. I worked full-time and maintained honors classes for 4 years. He thought those things were equal. He thought his choice to drop out meant he deserved money more than I did. I stood up and told him he needed to leave my apartment. His face turned red. He stood up fast enough that the couch moved backward. He said I was going to regret this. He said I was choosing money over family. He said Mom and Dad would never forgive me for this betrayal. He walked to the door and grabbed the handle. He turned back and said his lawyer would be in touch about contesting the will. Then he left and slammed the door hard enough to make the wall shake. I locked the door and leaned against it. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I was angry at him for thinking I would just hand over Grandma's gift because he showed up and asked nicely. I was angry at myself for the small part of me that felt guilty for saying no. I spent the rest of the weekend going through the documents Nathan gave me. There were bank statements and property deeds and investment portfolios. There were tax documents and insurance policies. Everything was organized in folders with labels in Grandma's neat handwriting. At the bottom of the stack, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. I recognized Grandma's handwriting immediately. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was 3 pages long on her good stationery. She started by saying she loved me and she was sorry she would not be there to see me read this. She said she watched my parents favor Vince our entire lives. She said it broke her heart to see me work. So hard for scraps of approval I never got. She said she tried to talk to my mother about the favoritism, but my mother would not listen. She said she knew I felt less than because of how my parents treated me. She said this inheritance was her way of telling me I was always worthy. She said I was always loved. She said I always deserved good things no matter what my parents thought about my gender. I sat on my couch and cried for an hour. I cried for Grandma and for the childhood I deserved but never had. I cried for the little girl who worked at 15 because her parents would not buy her a car. I cried for the college student who took out loans while her brother got family money. I kept reading through my tears. Grandma wrote that she hoped this money would give me freedom to build the life I wanted. She said I should not wait for a man to provide it for me. She said she was proud of the strong woman I became despite my parents. She said their limitations were not my fault. Her words felt like a hug from beyond the grave. They gave me strength to face what I knew was coming from my family. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I would keep it forever. On Monday, I took a personal day from work. I drove 4 hours to Grandma's house with the keys Nathan gave me. The house looked the same as it always had. White siding with blue shutters and a garden full of roses in the front yard. I parked in the driveway and sat in my car for a minute. An older woman came out of the house next door. She was small with white hair and she carried a plate covered in foil. She walked over to my car and I rolled down the window. She said her name was Mrs. Sisson, and she lived next door to Grandma for 20 years. She said she was glad Grandma left everything to me. She said I was the only one who visited and cared about her. She handed me the plate and said she made cookies. She said Grandma talked about me all the time. She said Vince came by twice in the past year asking Grandma for money. She said both times he left angry when Grandma said no. Mrs. Sisson patted my arm and said Grandma made the right choice. Then she went back to her house and I went inside. The house smelled like Grandma's lavender soap and old books. Everything was neat and clean the way she always kept it. I walked through the living room and kitchen and felt her presence everywhere. I started going through her desk in the spare bedroom. I found bills and receipts and old photos. I found a leather journal with her name on the cover. I opened it and saw dates from 5 years ago. She wrote about our family. She wrote about calling my mother to talk about the favoritism. She wrote about my mother making excuses for why Vince got more. She wrote about refusing to give Vince money when he asked. She wrote about me visiting every weekend when she got sick. She wrote about being proud of my job and my apartment and my life. Reading her words felt like proof that I was not crazy. Everything I felt about my family was real. She saw it too. She documented it in her own handwriting. I kept reading and found more entries about Vince. She wrote about him asking for $15,000 for gambling debts. She wrote about telling him to get help. She wrote about him getting angry and not visiting for 8 months. She wrote that she would not enable his problems by giving him money. The context made everything make sense. Grandma did not leave him nothing because she was mean. She left him nothing because she loved him enough to not make his problems worse. My phone rang and I saw my mother's name. I answered and she started talking before I could say hello. She asked what I was doing at Grandma's house without telling the family. Her voice was sharp and angry. I said I was the executor and I had the legal right to be here. I said I needed to secure the property and start managing the estate. She said it was disrespectful to go through Grandma's things without Vince there. I reminded her that Vince visited twice in 18 months. She said that did not matter because he was still family. I told her I would call her later and hung up. I kept looking through Grandma's desk. I found more journals going back 15 years. I opened one from when I was in high school. Grandma wrote about my graduation. She wrote about my parents leaving early to go to Vince's college party. She wrote about how I looked sad when I saw them leave. She wrote about being angry at my mother for missing my speech. I turned pages and found entries about my college graduation. She wrote about my parents saying it was too far to drive. She wrote about going by herself and being proud of me. She wrote about every Sunday when I called to tell her about my life. She wrote about my parents barely asking about me when she talked to them. Her documentation of these patterns over years showed me how deep the problem went. It was not just a few incidents. It was a lifetime of my parents choosing Vince over me again and again. Grandma saw it all and wrote it down. She left me proof that I was not imagining things or being too sensitive. She left me validation that what I experienced was real and wrong. I locked the journals back in the desk drawer and left the house. My phone rang 3 days later while I was at work. Charlotte's name showed on the screen. I answered and she got straight to business. She needed my signature on documents to set up accounts and transfer the assets from Grandma's estate into my name. The list was long. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds, tax forms. She said we should meet Wednesday afternoon at her office to handle everything at once. I agreed and wrote the appointment in my calendar. Charlotte's voice stayed professional but kind. She said I was doing well managing all the administrative tasks, and I should feel proud of handling everything properly. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said I did not owe anyone explanations about my financial decisions. The money was mine legally and ethically, and I had the right to manage it however I wanted. Her words felt like permission to stop defending myself to my family. I thanked her and hung up feeling both overwhelmed and grateful. The next morning, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox addressed to Nathan. The return address showed a law firm I did not recognize. I called Nathan and he told me to bring it to his office unopened. I drove over during my lunch break and handed him the envelope. He opened it and read through the papers inside. His expression stayed neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten. He looked up and told me Vince hired a lawyer named Dominic Fletcher, who was officially challenging the will. The letter claimed I used undue influence over Grandma in her final years to manipulate her into leaving everything to me. It demanded mediation before pursuing litigation. Nathan set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. He said this was a common pressure tactic meant to scare me into settling. The challenge had no merit given all the documentation of Grandma's mental capacity and her clear written explanations of her reasoning. He told me not to engage directly with Vince or Dominic Fletcher. All communication would go through him from now on. I nodded and felt my stomach twist with anxiety about what came next. That evening, my phone rang and both my parents' names showed on the screen. I answered and heard my father's voice first. He was using his serious tone. He said Vince's lawyer told them we could avoid court if I just agreed to split things fairly. My mother's voice joined in from speakerphone. She said legal battles would eat up the inheritance in lawyer fees, and I should be smart and compromise now. I asked them why they never thought I deserved equal treatment growing up. My mother said that was not relevant to the current situation. Her words told me everything about their inability to see their own role in this mess. I told them I was following Grandma's wishes as stated in her legal will. If Vince wanted to waste money on a lawsuit that had no chance of winning, That was his choice. My father's voice got louder. He called me ungrateful and said after everything they did for me, this is how I repay them. I felt anger rise in my chest. I pointed out they paid for Vince's college while I got scholarships. They gave him a car while I bought my own. They put his needs first my entire childhood. I asked what exactly I was supposed to be grateful for. My mother started sobbing. My father said I was not welcome at family events until I fixed this mess I created. The call ended with my mother crying in the background. I sat on my couch staring at my phone. They were blaming me for a situation caused by their lifetime of favoritism and Vince's entitlement. The irony would be funny if it was not so painful. I called Natalia and she came over with takeout. She listened to everything and reminded me that their rejection was about their inability to face their own failures, not about my worth. Her words helped, but the hurt still sat heavy in my chest. On Friday, I met with Sabine Lockhart at her office downtown. Natalia recommended her after I mentioned needing help processing everything. Sabine's office had comfortable chairs and soft lighting. She asked me to tell her what brought me in. I explained the inheritance and the family conflict, and how guilty I felt about having so much while Vince had nothing. Sabine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something that shifted my whole perspective. She said I was grieving multiple losses. I was grieving my grandmother. I was grieving the family relationships I thought I had. I was grieving the fantasy that my parents might eventually see me as equal to Vince. She said the inheritance was not just money. It was proof that at least one person in my family saw my true value. Her words made tears run down my face. Nathan called the following Tuesday. Dominic Fletcher filed the official will contest in probate court. The process would take several months to resolve. Nathan assured me the challenge was baseless, but I should prepare for my family to escalate their pressure tactics as they realized legal action would not work quickly. He recommended I document any harassment or threats in case we needed to pursue a restraining order. That seemed extreme until Vince started leaving voicemails. The first one was angry. The second one was angrier. By the fourth one, he was yelling that I stole from him and I would regret it. I saved every message and forwarded them to Nathan. My cousin called that Wednesday. She received Grandma's antique dining table and chairs in the will. She said she wanted to apologize for my parents' behavior and tell me she supported my decision to honor Grandma's wishes. She said she witnessed the favoritism growing up and always felt bad for me. She wished she had said something at the time. Her validation meant more than she knew. She mentioned that several other extended family members thought my parents and Vince were being unreasonable, but they were afraid to speak up. Hearing that I had some family support made me feel less alone. I drove back to Grandma's house on Saturday to continue sorting through her belongings. I found a cardboard box in the hall closet filled with cards and letters. I opened it and saw my handwriting on envelope after envelope, birthday cards I sent from college, thank you notes for Christmas gifts, postcards from trips I took, letters about my first apartment and my new job. She kept everything. I looked through the whole box and found only 5 items from Vince, all birthday cards. None had personal messages beyond his signature. The physical evidence of our different relationships with her made me feel less guilty about the inheritance. I was putting the box back when I heard the front door open. I walked into the living room and saw Vince standing there. He said he had a right to go through Grandma's things too. I told him he needed to leave since he was not the executor, and the property was legally mine now. He ignored me and walked toward the bedroom. He started opening drawers and grabbing items. He picked up Grandma's gold watch from the dresser. I told him to put it down because Grandma specifically mentioned in her will that the watch should go to me. He shoved it in his pocket and said it belonged to him. I pulled out my phone and called the police non-emergency line. I asked them to send an officer to remove a trespasser from my property. Vince's face turned red and he started yelling that I could not do this to him. The officer held up his hand and Vince stopped mid-sentence. The officer asked me if I was the legal owner of this property. I pulled out the will from my bag and showed him the relevant pages. The officer read through it while his partner kept Vince from moving closer to me. The officer asked if I was the executor. I said yes, and showed him Nathan's business card with a note on the back confirming my role. The officer turned to Vince and told him he needed to leave immediately since this was private property, and he did not have permission to be here. Vince argued that his grandmother's house should belong to the whole family. The officer said the will was clear and he needed to leave now or face trespassing charges. Vince pulled out his phone and said he was calling his lawyer. The officer said that was fine, but he still needed to leave the property while making that call. Vince shoved past me toward the door and yelled that I would regret this. He said he was suing me for emotional distress and I stole his inheritance. The officer followed him outside while I stood in the living room shaking. The second officer stayed with me and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but my hands would not stop trembling. The officer asked if this was the first time Vince showed up uninvited. I said yes, but he had been calling and leaving angry messages. The officer suggested I change the locks right away and consider getting a restraining order if Vince kept showing up. I had not thought about needing a restraining order against my own brother. The officer said family disputes over inheritance could get ugly fast, and it was better to be safe. He gave me his card and said to call if Vince came back. I thanked him and locked the door after both officers left. I sat on the couch for 20 minutes trying to calm down. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan asking if everything was okay. I called him back and explained what happened. He said I did the right thing calling the police and asked me to forward any threatening messages Vince left. He also agreed with the officer about changing the locks. I looked up locksmiths in the area and found one who could come out that afternoon. The locksmith arrived 2 hours later and changed all 3 locks on the house. He also installed a security camera above the front door that connected to an app on my phone. The whole thing cost $400, but I felt safer knowing Vince could not just walk in anymore. Mrs. Sisson from next door came over while the locksmith was working. She asked if everything was all right after seeing the police cars. I explained that my brother showed up without permission and tried to take things that were not his. Mrs. Sisson said she would keep an eye on the property and call me if she saw Vince around again. She gave me her phone number and I gave her mine. She said my grandmother talked about me all the time and she was glad the house went to someone who actually cared. Her words made my throat tight. Mrs. Sisson went back to her house and I finished up with the locksmith. I tested all 3 new locks twice to make sure they worked. The security camera showed a clear view of the front porch and driveway. I felt angry that I had to do this because of my own brother. I also felt something else. I was starting to see patterns in Vince's behavior that I used to excuse. He always got loud when he did not get his way. He always blamed other people for his problems. He always acted like the world owed him something. I used to think he was just hot-tempered. Now I saw it was more than that. I drove back to my apartment that evening and called Charlotte the next morning. She had me come to her office to start setting up accounts. Charlotte walked me through each step of transferring assets into my name. We opened a new savings account for the $200,000. We set up a brokerage account for the investment portfolio. We started the paperwork to transfer the house deed. Charlotte explained that the investments were solid overall, but needed some rebalancing. She showed me charts and graphs breaking down what I owned. Some stocks were doing well, some bonds were stable, some mutual funds needed adjusting. With proper management, the investments would provide good passive income. The savings would cover property taxes and create an emergency fund. Charlotte asked what I wanted to do with the house. I said I was not sure yet. She said that was fine and I should take my time with that decision. The house was the most emotionally complex asset and there was no rush to sell. We could rent it out for steady income or I could keep it empty for now. Charlotte said the important thing was not to make big decisions while still processing grief. I appreciated her practical approach. She treated me like someone capable of managing money instead of someone who needed protection from it. We spent 3 hours going through paperwork and setting up accounts. By the end, I had a clear picture of what I owned and what my options were. Charlotte gave me homework to think about my financial goals for the next year and the next 5 years. She said we would meet again in 2 weeks to finalize the investment rebalancing. I got home and found a long email from my mother waiting in my inbox. The subject line said, "We need to talk about your behavior." I almost deleted it without reading, but I opened it instead. My mother wrote 8 paragraphs detailing all the ways I was being selfish and hurting the family. She said I turned Grandma against Vince in her final years by visiting so much and poisoning her mind with complaints about childhood. She said a good daughter would put family harmony above money. She said I was becoming a bitter and greedy person she did not recognize. She said Vince was struggling and needed help while I was comfortable and did not need the inheritance. She said if I really loved my family, I would split everything equally. The email was so full of lies and twisted facts that I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. My mother actually blamed me for visiting my dying grandmother. She actually said I was greedy for accepting an inheritance given to me legally. She actually claimed I did not need money when I worked my way through college while they paid for Vince. I saved the email to show Sabine at my next appointment. Then I blocked my mother's email address. I could not handle constant attacks every time I checked my messages. My phone immediately felt lighter without that source of stress. Nathan called me 2 days later with information about Vince's financial situation. He said Dominic Fletcher filed documents in the will contest that revealed Vince's debts. Vince was not $30,000 in debt like my mother claimed. He was $60,000 in debt. The breakdown included credit cards, personal loans, and back rent on an apartment he got evicted from last year. Dominic was arguing that Grandma should have known Vince needed financial help, and her failure to provide it showed she was not thinking clearly. Nathan said this actually helped our case. It proved Grandma made an informed decision not to enable Vince's financial problems. Nathan had documentation showing Grandma knew about some of Vince's debts because Vince asked her for money to pay them. She refused and told him to get his life together. Nathan said the will contest was essentially doomed, but Vince's lawyer was probably dragging it out to collect fees. He told me not to worry and let him handle all the legal work. I went back to Grandma's house the following weekend to continue going through her belongings. I found a file box in her bedroom closet labeled estate planning. Inside were letters between Grandma and Nathan going back 3 years. I sat on the floor and read through everything. Grandma documented 6 times that Vince asked her for money. The first request was for $5,000 to pay credit card bills. The second was for $8,000 for gambling debts. The third was for $20,000 to cover rent and car payments. Each time Grandma refused and wrote Nathan a letter explaining her reasoning. She said Vince never learned from his mistakes. She said giving him money would just enable more bad choices. She said he needed to face consequences and grow up. After each refusal, Vince would get angry and not visit for months. Grandma wrote about feeling sad that her grandson only contacted her when he wanted money. She wrote about hoping he would change, but accepting that he probably would not. Her paper trail was incredibly thorough. She kept copies of text messages where Vince asked for money. She kept notes about phone conversations. She even kept a log of his visits with dates and what they discussed. Nathan was right that the will contest was doomed. No judge would look at this evidence and think Grandma was confused or manipulated. She knew exactly what she was doing and why. I had my next appointment with Sabine 3 days later. I brought my mother's email and told Sabine about my guilt over having so much money while Vince struggled. Sabine read the email and asked me what I thought about my mother's accusations. I said they were lies, but they still hurt. Sabine asked why I felt guilty about Vince's financial problems. I said he was my brother and maybe I should help him. Sabine asked if giving Vince money would actually help him. I thought about it and said probably not based on his history. Sabine said Vince's struggles were consequences of his choices and my parents' enabling. She said giving him money would not teach him accountability. It would just delay his need to face reality. She asked me what Grandma would want me to do. I said Grandma would want me to honor her wishes and not enable Vince's irresponsibility. Sabine said I was starting to understand that honoring Grandma meant accepting her wisdom about what Vince actually needed. What he needed was not a financial bailout. What he needed was to learn how to take care of himself. I left that session feeling less guilty and more clear about my role in this situation. I took a week off work and drove back to Grandma's house to really go through everything. Being in her space made me feel connected to her. I could almost hear her voice in every room. I started in the living room with her bookshelves. She had books about history and gardening and cooking. I boxed up the ones I wanted to keep and marked others for donation. I moved to her bedroom and went through her closet. Most of her clothes would go to charity, but I kept a few sweaters that still smelled like her perfume. I found photo albums in the bottom drawer of her dresser. I sat on the bed and opened the first one. Pictures of me covered almost every page. Me as a baby. Me starting kindergarten. Me at my first piano recital. Me graduating high school. Me in my college dorm. Each photo had a note in Grandma's handwriting about what I accomplished or what milestone I reached. I looked through all 5 albums and found maybe 20 pictures of Vince total. Most were from when we were very young. There were no notes about his activities or achievements. The physical evidence of our different relationships sat in my hands. She documented my life because she cared about my life. She barely documented Vince because he barely gave her anything to document. Amos Wilcox came by on Thursday afternoon to assess the house. I met him at the front door and he walked through every room taking notes. He checked the roof and the foundation and the plumbing. He said the property was in good condition overall. It would need some minor repairs, but nothing major. He said the house would sell quickly in the current market for around $300,000. Or I could rent it out for about $1,800 a month, which would cover the property taxes and insurance with some left over. He asked what I was thinking about doing. I said I was not ready to decide yet. Amos said that was fine and there was no rush. He gave me his card and said to call when I was ready to move forward either way. Having professional information helped me feel less overwhelmed. I was managing a property 4 hours from where I lived, but at least I had options and people to help me figure it out. Nathan called Friday morning with news. The probate court dismissed Vince's will contest. The judge ruled that Grandma had documented mental capacity and detailed estate planning over several years. Her written explanations of her reasoning made her intentions clear and unambiguous. Vince could appeal, but Nathan said no judge would overturn this decision. The evidence supporting Grandma's choices was too strong. I felt relief wash over me. The legal threat was over. Nathan said he would send me the official court documents, and we could close out the estate proceedings. He congratulated me on seeing this through despite my family's pressure. I thanked him for all his help and hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. I walked into my apartment and dropped my keys on the counter. The relief hit me like a wave. The legal battle was over. Nathan won. Grandma's will stood exactly as she wrote it. Everything she left me was mine to keep. I sat on my couch and stared at the ceiling for a while. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up and saw a voicemail notification from my father. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play. His voice filled my living room with that tone he used when he thought he was being reasonable. He said the judge was wrong. He said the legal system was corrupt and failed to see the truth. He said I should still do the right thing and share with Vince regardless of what some court decided. He said family was more important than money, and I was destroying us over greed. He said Grandma would be ashamed of me if she could see what I was doing. The voicemail ended and I sat there holding my phone. The thing that struck me most was not the words, but what they revealed. My father genuinely could not understand why Grandma made the choice she did. He could not see the decades of favoritism that shaped our childhood. He could not acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, Grandma had good reasons for leaving everything to me. He would never admit that he and my mother created this situation by treating Vince like a prince and me like an afterthought. I deleted the voicemail and blocked his number. My phone buzzed again an hour later. Text messages from Vince started flooding in one after another. The first one said I stole from him. The second one said I would regret this. The third one said karma would catch up to me eventually. The fourth one called me names I would not repeat. The fifth one threatened that I would pay for what I did. I watched them come in and felt my hands start to shake. Not from fear exactly, but from the realization that my brother was genuinely unstable. These were not the texts of someone having a bad day. These were threats from someone who could not control his anger. I took screenshots of every message. I forwarded them all to Nathan with a note explaining what was happening. He called me back within 10 minutes. He said he was forwarding everything to Dominic Fletcher with a warning. If Vince continued harassing me, we would pursue a restraining order. Nathan asked if I felt safe. I said I did not know. He told me to document everything, keep my doors locked, and call the police if Vince showed up at my apartment. The texts stopped after Nathan contacted Dominic. I checked my phone constantly for the next few days, waiting for more messages, but nothing came. I stayed alert anyway. Vince had proven he could not handle losing, and I did not trust what he might do next. I had my regular appointment with Sabine on Thursday afternoon. I drove to her office and sat in the waiting room flipping through a magazine without reading it. When she called me back, I settled into the chair across from her desk and she asked how I was doing. I said fine at first. Then I said actually not fine. Then I started talking and could not stop. I told her about the voicemail from my father. I told her about the threatening texts from Vince. I told her about the relief of winning in court mixed with the sadness of losing my family. I told her something I had never said out loud before. I said I spent my whole life waiting for my parents to see me as equal to Vince. I said the inheritance conflict forced me to accept that would never happen. Sabine leaned forward and asked what it felt like to say that. I said it hurt. I said it felt like mourning. She said I was grieving the parents I deserved but did not have. She said my parents had limitations that were not my fault and not my responsibility to fix. She asked what Grandma would want for me. I said Grandma would want me to stop waiting for approval from people who could not give it. She said I was starting to understand. We talked for another 40 minutes about boundaries and acceptance and letting go of fantasies that would never come true. When I left her office, I felt sad but also lighter, like I had been carrying something heavy my whole life and finally put it down. Charlotte called me Friday morning to schedule a meeting about finalizing the investment strategy. I met her at her office downtown on Monday afternoon. She had papers spread across her desk showing different scenarios for Grandma's portfolio. She walked me through each option, explaining the pros and cons in language I could understand. She showed me how the passive income could supplement my salary. She said with smart management, the investments would generate enough money to give me real financial security for the first time in my life. She asked about my job. I said I liked being an accountant and was good at it. She said I should keep working then. She said knowing I had this safety net would change how I thought about my future. I could take risks. I could pursue opportunities. I could handle emergencies without constant anxiety. She asked what my financial baseline had been before the inheritance. I said anxiety. I said I always worried about money because I learned early that no one would help me if I failed. Charlotte nodded and said that made sense given my family dynamics. She said the inheritance was not just money, it was freedom from that fear. We spent 2 hours going over the details and signing paperwork. When I left her office, I had a clear plan for managing the investments and a much better understanding of what I now owned. I drove back to Grandma's house the following weekend to make a decision about the property. Amos met me there Saturday morning. We walked through every room while he explained my options again. I could sell and get around $300,000 after fees and taxes. Or I could rent it out for about $1,800 a month, which would cover property taxes, insurance, and maintenance with some left over. He asked what I was leaning toward. I said I was not ready to sell. The house was where Grandma loved me unconditionally. Selling it felt like losing the last physical connection to her. Amos said renting was a good option then. He said he could recommend a property management company that specialized in long-distance landlords. They would handle maintenance, find tenants, collect rent, and deal with any problems that came up. I would just receive a check each month and occasional updates. I asked how much that would cost. He said usually 10% of the monthly rent. I did the math in my head. That was still $1,600 a month in my pocket after they took their cut. I told Amos to set up a meeting with the property management company. He made some calls and scheduled an appointment for the next day. I met with the property manager Sunday afternoon. She walked through the house taking notes and photos. She said the place was in good shape and would rent quickly. She explained her company's process for screening tenants and handling repairs. She gave me a contract to review. I took it home and read through it carefully. Everything looked reasonable. I signed it and sent it back. The house was now officially a rental property instead of my grandmother's home, but at least it was still mine. A letter arrived at my apartment 2 weeks later. The return address was a law office I did not recognize. I opened it and found a formal demand from my parents' lawyer. The letter said I owed Vince $50,000 as compensation for emotional distress caused by the inheritance situation. It cited pain and suffering. It claimed my actions caused severe psychological harm to my brother. It demanded payment within 30 days or they would file a lawsuit. I read the letter 3 times trying to understand how my parents thought this made sense. I forwarded it to Nathan immediately. He called me that evening. He said the demand had no legal basis whatsoever. He said emotional distress claims required proof of intentional infliction of harm, and my honoring Grandma's legal will did not qualify. He said he would respond to their lawyer, making clear that further frivolous demands would be considered harassment. He asked if I was okay. I said I was amazed at my family's continued entitlement. I said I could not believe they still thought they deserved money from an inheritance someone else specifically chose not to give them. Nathan said some people never learn to accept consequences. He said my parents spent decades creating this dynamic, and they could not admit their role in it now. He said his response would shut down this particular avenue of attack. I thanked him and hung up. I was not scared anymore. I was just tired of dealing with people who refused to see reality. I went back to Grandma's house the next month to go through her jewelry and personal items. I had been putting it off because it felt too intimate, too final. But the property manager said the house would show better without all the personal belongings still there. I started in her bedroom with the jewelry box on her dresser. Most of the pieces were costume jewelry worth more in memories than money. I kept a few necklaces I remembered her wearing. I found her wedding ring at the bottom of the box wrapped in tissue paper. There was a note with it in her handwriting. She said she wanted me to have it when I got married. She said she hoped I would find a partner who valued me for who I was, rather than seeing me as less than because I was a woman. She said she knew I would choose someone who treated me as an equal because I had learned my worth despite my parents' failure to teach it. I sat on her bed and cried, holding the ring. Then I smiled because she understood exactly what I needed to hear. I put the ring in my purse to take home. I spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through her things. Some items went into boxes for donation. Some went into boxes to keep. Some went into boxes to sell. By the time I finished, the house felt emptier, but also lighter, ready for someone new to make it a home. 6 months passed after Grandma's death. I settled into a new normal. I went to work every day and managed my accounts. I met with Charlotte quarterly to review the investments. I paid bills from the rental income and watched my savings grow. I went to therapy every other week to process everything that happened. My parents and Vince stopped contacting me directly. My supportive cousin called sometimes to update me on family news. She said they complained about me at every gathering. She said they told everyone I was greedy and cruel. She said most of the extended family just nodded and changed the subject because arguing was pointless. I asked if that bothered her. She said no because she knew the truth. I realized I might never have a relationship with my parents or brother again. That thought made me sad sometimes late at night when I was alone, but it also felt freeing. I stopped hoping they would change. I stopped imagining conversations where they finally admitted their mistakes. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I just lived my life and let them live theirs. The grief was real, but so was the peace. I used some of the inheritance money to book a trip to Italy in the spring. Grandma always wanted to go, but never got the chance. She talked about seeing the art in Florence and the history in Rome. She had books about Italian cooking and Renaissance painters. I decided to take the trip for both of us. I packed a small container with some of her ashes. I flew to Rome in April and spent a week wandering through ancient ruins and Baroque churches. I scattered some of her ashes in a quiet corner of the Forum. I took a train to Florence and spent another week in museums looking at paintings she would have loved. I scattered more ashes near the Ponte Vecchio at sunset. I felt her presence with me the whole time, like she was finally getting to experience the art and history that fascinated her for so many years. I bought postcards and wrote messages to Mrs. Sisson and my cousin telling them about the adventure Grandma and I were having together. I ate pasta and drank wine and walked until my feet hurt. I came home exhausted and happy. The trip felt like a gift we shared even though she was not physically there. Back home, I threw myself into my career with new energy. The financial security from the inheritance changed how I approached my job. I was not desperate anymore. I was not scared of losing my position or struggling to pay bills. That confidence showed in how I handled clients and managed projects. My boss noticed. He called me into his office 3 months after I got back from Italy. He said he was promoting me to senior accountant with a significant raise. He said I had proven myself over the years and my recent work was exceptional. He asked what changed. I said I just felt more confident lately. He said it showed and congratulated me. I negotiated better terms than I would have before. I asked for more vacation time and flexible work arrangements. I got both because I was willing to walk away if they said no. My boss commented that I seemed different, more assertive, more self-assured. I smiled and said I was just finally valuing myself the way I deserved. I left his office with a new title and better pay, and the knowledge that Grandma's inheritance gave me more than money. It gave me permission to believe I was worth something. I signed up to volunteer at the Women's Financial Independence Center 3 months after Italy. The organization offered free financial literacy workshops to women trying to build careers and manage money on their own. I filled out an application explaining my background in accounting and my interest in helping other women learn the skills I had to figure out myself. The director called me 2 days later and asked when I could start. She said they desperately needed volunteers who understood both the practical side of money management and the emotional challenges women faced when they had been taught their whole lives that men would handle finances for them. I started the following week teaching a basic budgeting class to 8 women ranging from 20 to 60 years old. Some were divorced and managing money alone for the first time. Some were young and trying to avoid the financial mistakes their mothers made. Some were supporting themselves after leaving bad relationships where their partners controlled all the money. I showed them how to track expenses and create realistic budgets and prioritize bills and build emergency funds. I talked about my own experience working since 15 and putting myself through college and learning to manage money because no one was going to do it for me. The women asked questions and shared their own stories and thanked me afterward for making finance feel less scary. I drove home that first night feeling more satisfied than I had felt at my regular job in months. This was what mattered. This was how I could honor what Grandma taught me about independence and self-worth. Natalia and I drove to my hometown on a Saturday morning in late September. The rental family had been living in Grandma's house for 4 months, and I wanted to check on the property and visit the grave. Natalia brought her camera because she liked taking pictures of small-town architecture. We stopped for coffee and drove the last hour listening to a podcast about financial planning for women, which made Natalia laugh because I had become obsessed with the topic since starting my volunteer work. I pulled up to Grandma's house and saw toys in the yard and curtains in the windows and a welcome mat on the front porch. The family was making it a home. The property manager said they were wonderful tenants who paid on time and took good care of everything. I felt glad that the house was used and loved instead of sitting empty. We drove past my old high school and the library where I spent so many afternoons studying, and the grocery store where I worked my first job. Natalia asked questions about my childhood, and I pointed out landmarks while telling her stories about growing up here. Some memories were good, most were complicated. We ended up at the cemetery on the edge of town where Grandma was buried next to my grandfather, who died before I was born. I brought fresh flowers and stood at her grave for a long time just thinking about everything that changed since April. I told her about the promotion and the trip to Italy and the volunteer work and the financial security that let me make choices instead of just surviving. I told her about cutting off my parents and Vince and learning to build my own life without their approval. I told her I was happy in a way I never thought possible when I was growing up in this town, feeling less than my brother. Natalia stood back, giving me space, but I could feel her support. I felt Grandma's presence too. Not in a supernatural way, but in the sense that her love and belief in me had become part of who I was now. She gave me permission to value myself, and I was finally learning how. My cousin called in October to invite me to her daughter's 8th birthday party. She said it would be a small family gathering, and she understood if I did not want to come given the situation with my parents. I asked if they would be there. She said yes, but also said several other relatives wanted to see me, and had told her privately they thought my parents were wrong about the inheritance. I thought about it for 2 days before deciding to go. I was not going to hide from family events forever, because my parents could not handle their own mistakes. I bought a generous gift, a science kit the birthday girl had mentioned wanting, and drove to my cousin's house on Saturday afternoon. I walked in carrying the wrapped present, and saw aunts and uncles and cousins I had not seen since Grandma's funeral. My parents were in the kitchen. Vince was not there. Several relatives came over immediately to hug me and ask how I was doing. My aunt pulled me aside within 5 minutes and said she was glad I came. She said my mother had been telling everyone I stole Vince's inheritance and turned Grandma against the family. She said most people were not buying it because they remembered how often I visited Grandma and how rarely Vince did. My uncle came over and said he always thought my parents favored Vince too much, and he was proud of me for making something of myself despite that. Another cousin said Grandma knew what she was doing, and her will was her business. I felt overwhelmed by the support from people I barely knew anymore. They saw the situation clearly, even if my parents never would. The birthday girl opened presents and loved the science kit. My cousin thanked me for being generous when I did not have to come at all. I stayed for cake and watched my parents across the room pretending I was not there. They did not approach me. I did not approach them. We existed in the same space without acknowledging each other, and that felt like progress compared to the screaming matches from months ago. An aunt I barely remembered from childhood gatherings pulled me into the hallway while everyone else was eating cake. She looked nervous. She said she needed to tell me something she should have said years ago. She apologized for not speaking up when we were kids about how differently my parents treated Vince and me. She said she watched it happen at every family gathering and it bothered her, but she did not want to cause conflict by saying anything. She said she regretted her silence now because maybe if more people had called out the favoritism, my parents would have changed. She said she was sorry, and she hoped I knew I deserved everything Grandma left me. Her apology surprised me. I did not expect anyone from that generation to acknowledge what happened, let alone apologize for not intervening. I told her I appreciated it, and I understood why she stayed quiet because confronting my parents about anything was exhausting. She asked if we could have lunch sometime and build a relationship now as adults. I said yes. I realized I could pick and choose which family relationships to maintain, instead of accepting the whole toxic package or nothing. The letter from Vince's lawyer arrived on a Tuesday in November. I saw the return address and felt my stomach drop before I even opened it. I sat down at my kitchen table and read it twice to make sure I understood correctly. The letter said Vince was withdrawing all legal challenges to Grandma's will and would pursue no further action regarding the inheritance. It was formal and brief with no explanation for the change. I called Nathan immediately. He said he was not surprised. He said Vince's case had no merit from the beginning, and his lawyer probably told him continuing would just waste more money on legal fees. Nathan suspected Vince either accepted he could not win, or more likely ran out of money to keep paying his lawyer to fight a losing battle. Either way, the legal threat was completely over. I could move forward without worrying about court dates or depositions or any more challenges to Grandma's wishes. I thanked Nathan for handling everything and hung up feeling lighter than I had felt in months. The last piece of uncertainty was gone. Vince could not take this from me. My parents could not guilt me into giving it up. The inheritance was mine legally and permanently, and I could finally stop looking over my shoulder waiting for the next attack. I paid off my car loan in December. The balance was $11,000, and I transferred the money from my inheritance account without even blinking at the amount. 2 weeks later, I paid off my student loans, another $18,000 that I had been chipping away at for 6 years. I logged into both accounts and stared at the zero balances, feeling something I had never felt before. Complete financial freedom. No debt. No monthly payments hanging over my head. No interest accumulating while I tried to get ahead. I owned my car outright. My education was paid for. My credit cards had zero balance because I learned early to never spend money I did not have. I had savings and investments and rental income and a good salary from my job. For the first time in my adult life, I was not just surviving, I was actually secure. I thought about Vince and his $60,000 in debt and his eviction and his pattern of asking other people to bail him out. I thought about how different our lives turned out because I learned to work hard and manage money while he learned that someone would always rescue him. Grandma saw that difference. She saw that I built something stable through effort and responsibility, while Vince built nothing but expected everything. Her will was not cruel or unfair like my parents claimed. It was honest recognition of the choices we each made and the people we each became. I had my final regular session with Sabine 2 days before Christmas. We had been meeting every other week for 8 months, and she said I had done the work I came to do. I processed the grief over Grandma's death, and the complicated feelings about the inheritance and the loss of my relationship with my parents and brother. I learned to set boundaries and recognize toxic patterns, and stop waiting for approval from people who would never give it. I built confidence in my own worth separate from my family's opinions. Sabine said I could call her anytime I needed a session, but she thought I was ready to manage on my own with occasional check-ins instead of regular therapy. She said she was proud of how I honored both Grandma's gift and my own value. She said a lot of people in my situation would have caved to family pressure or felt too guilty to keep the inheritance, but I stood firm in what I knew was right. I thanked her for helping me navigate everything, and left her office feeling grateful for the professional support that made such a difference. I could not have done this alone, and I did not have to. I called my college in January to ask about setting up a scholarship fund. The development office transferred me to someone who handled donor relations, and I explained what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a scholarship for women studying accounting or finance who were working their way through school like I did. I wanted to name it after Grandma Faye to honor her belief that women should build their own financial independence. I wanted to fund it with $50,000 from the inheritance to help multiple students over many years. The woman on the phone sounded thrilled. She said this was exactly the kind of scholarship they needed, and she would send me paperwork to set everything up. 2 weeks later, I signed the documents and transferred the money. The scholarship would award $5,000 annually to a qualifying student starting next fall. The college asked if I would be willing to speak at the award ceremony in the spring when they gave out the first scholarship. I said yes. I wanted to meet the recipient and tell her about Grandma and why this mattered. I wanted her to know that someone believed in her potential and invested in her future. The scholarship felt like the perfect way to honor Grandma's values and create something lasting that would help other women long after I was gone. 1 year after Grandma died, I looked at my life and barely recognized it. I had financial security I never imagined possible. I had meaningful work both in my career and my volunteer teaching. I had supportive friendships with people like Natalia who saw me clearly. I had professional relationships with people like Charlotte and Nathan who treated me with respect. I had cut out toxic family members who would never value me and started building connections with relatives who did. I stopped waiting for my parents to finally see me as equal to Vince because I accepted that would never happen. Their limitations were about them, not me. I built a life that reflected my own values and priorities instead of trying to earn approval from people who could not give it. The inheritance was not just about money, though the financial security mattered. It was about validation. It was about knowing at least one person in my family saw my worth and loved me unconditionally. Grandma's gift freed me to become fully myself without apologizing for taking up space or wanting things or believing I deserved good treatment. I was thriving in ways I never thought possible when I was the overlooked daughter working 3 jobs to pay for college while my brother got everything handed to him. I visited Grandma's grave on the anniversary of her death in April. I brought flowers and stood there for a long time telling her everything. I told her about the scholarship that would help young women like I was. I told her about the promotion at work and the confidence I gained from financial security. I told her about the trip to Italy where I scattered her ashes in places she always wanted to see. I told her about the volunteer work teaching other women to manage money and build independence. I told her about cutting off my parents and Vince and learning to be okay with that loss. I thanked her for seeing me when they could not. I thanked her for loving me unconditionally when they loved me only if I stayed small and quiet and was accepted less than Vince. I thanked her for having the courage to make a will that reflected her values instead of bowing to family pressure and splitting everything equally like my parents demanded. Her final act of love freed me from a lifetime of feeling less than. I was finally living fully instead of just surviving and trying to prove I was good enough. I promised her I would honor her gift by continuing to help other women and by never accepting less than I deserved again. My cousin called on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. She said my parents asked about me at a family gathering last weekend. They wanted to know how I was doing, but were too proud to reach out themselves. She said they looked smaller somehow, like the weight of their choices had physically diminished them. I stirred the pasta and felt a small pang of sadness for them. They lost a daughter over their inability to see past their own biases, but I felt no desire to resume contact unless they could acknowledge their role in our broken relationship. She said they still blamed me for everything, still insisted I should have shared the inheritance with Vince. Their pattern of blaming everyone but themselves remained unchanged. I thanked her for letting me know and told her I was doing well. After we hung up, I realized I meant it. I was doing well without them. The scholarship ceremony took place on a warm spring evening in the college auditorium where I graduated years ago. I sat in the audience watching students receive their awards and felt nervous about speaking later. The development officer introduced the first recipient of the Grandma Faye Financial Independence Scholarship. A young woman named Maya walked onto the stage looking overwhelmed. She was working 2 jobs while maintaining a high-grade point average in accounting. The officer read her essay about growing up watching her mother struggle financially and wanting to build independence for herself. Maya reminded me so much of myself at that age. After the ceremony, I met her backstage. I told her about Grandma and why I created the scholarship. I explained how my grandmother believed women should build their own financial security. Maya started crying and said it meant everything to know someone believed in her potential. She said the scholarship would let her quit one of her jobs and focus more on her studies. I hugged her and told her she deserved this support. Walking back to my car, I realized this was what Grandma wanted. Her love and support rippling outward to help other women thrive long after she was gone. I met him at one of my volunteer teaching sessions 6 months after the scholarship ceremony. He helped coordinate the financial literacy program and noticed me working with a group of women on budgeting basics. We started talking after class and discovered we shared similar values about education and independence. His name was Ethan, and he treated me like an equal partner from the start. He celebrated my promotion at work instead of feeling threatened by my success. He never knew the insecure version of me who sought approval from parents who could not give it. When I told him about my family situation, he was amazed. He could not understand parents who favored one child over another based on gender. His perspective helped me see how far I had come since Grandma died. I was no longer the overlooked daughter trying to prove her worth. I was confident and secure in myself. Ethan saw that strength and valued it. We took things slow, but I felt hopeful about the future in a way I never expected. 2 years after receiving the inheritance, I looked at my life and barely recognized it in the best possible way. I had financial security that gave me freedom to make choices based on what I wanted instead of what I could afford. My career was thriving after my promotion, and I loved my work. I had meaningful relationships with people who valued me for who I was. The scholarship fund was helping young women like Maya build their futures. I volunteered regularly teaching financial literacy and felt connected to my community. Ethan and I were talking about moving in together. I had cut ties with toxic family members and built connections with relatives who actually cared about me. The inheritance was never just about money. It was about validation and freedom and knowing I was worthy of love and investment all along. Grandma saw my value when my parents could not. She gave me the gift of believing in myself. I carried her belief forward every day. I was finally genuinely happy in a way I never thought possible when I was that overlooked daughter working 3 jobs to pay for college while my brother got everything handed to him. I visited Grandma's grave every few months and told her about my life. I thanked her for seeing me and loving me and having the courage to make a will that reflected her values. Her final act of love freed me to become fully myself. I was living the life she always wanted for me, and I knew she would be proud.